We've discussed some of the security concerns in the last video, so let's get into configuring some more of the port security features in order to mitigate some of those concerns. So I mentioned shutting down unused ports, and you might be thinking, well, that could really be a nuisance because I have hundreds or thousands of ports out there. I'm going to have to go into each interface on everything and go do a shutdown command, and it's annoying. So I can at least offer some sort of solace in a command that'll make your life a little bit easier. So let's add a switch and go into our command line. And what we can do is configure a number of interfaces at one time. And what we can do is run the interface range command. And the interface range command will allow us to configure a large number of interfaces at one time, either for shutdown, no shutdown, description, speed duplex, switch port security coming up, any of that stuff you can do with this range command. So it's very handy. So what you can do is interface range, type of interface, and then the number, and then you can do a dash, and that means port 1 through port, say, 10. And you could run it just like that, or you can do a comma, and then you can just tell it another type of port, so another bunch of fast Ethernets, and we're going to do 15 to 20. So now I'm going to say I want to configure ports 1 to 10 and 15 to 20, but not 11 to 14. And when you do that, it'll bring you into interface range config mode. One thing to note about this, though, based on the version of iOS you're running, you might have to put spaces here before and after the dash, or before and after the comma, or no dashes, or things like that. It really depends on what you're running. So just use the question mark and the tab complete to try and figure out exactly what it wants. So now we're in interface range command. We can do shutdown. We can shut a whole bunch of them down. We can do no shut. We can give them all a description. We can set their speed. We can do all sorts of fun things in here. Any of the commands that you could normally do from an interface, or at least the majority of them, you can do through the interface range command, so that's very handy. So let's, and if you do a show run, you can see there it is configuring all of our ports, but not the ones that we skipped. So that's very handy. So let's back out of that. Remember I was talking about dhcp problems. So if somebody has a server that's running dhcp, and that potentially is connected to our switch, and we have a client out there, he's got some sort of computer, and he's also connected to the switch. What we want to have happen is we do not want this client to offer up IP addresses. So we want to allow any of our access ports connected to our end PCs to do DHCP discover, but we don't want to do a DHCP offer from here. So what we can do is enable a feature called DHCP snooping on this switch. And what that does is it checks the DHCP packets that are going back and forth, and it says, if this is an offer, it should only be coming from the ports that are configured. So what you do is you trust an interface that you want to have offer packets come from, but then you leave snooping on for all the others, and it rejects anything that's not a discover that's coming from these. So that's a very nice feature. Unfortunately, I can't show that to you in this that I have right now, but if you have a physical device, you can, depending on what version you have and what device it is, you can turn on that feature, but I'll show you how to potentially do that. So what you would do is go into global config mode, and we're going to turn on DHCP snooping. So IP DHCP snooping. If you did that, it'll enable it globally, so that turns on the feature essentially. You would then define a specific VLAN. So if I had VLAN 99 on here, and sorry, his name. I could say turn on snooping for VLAN 99, and then that VLAN would be assigned to a bunch of ports. So that would turn on snooping for that VLAN. What I would then do is go into an interface, so specifically this port FastEtho1 that's connected to our server. I'm going to go into FastEtho1 and I'm going to say IP dhcp snooping trust, and that would tell it this is okay, he's a server, I want him to offer IP addresses. So that's how you would configure IP dhcp snooping, and that's a very handy feature. Keeps people from causing problems, and I'd suggest everyone turn that on. One thing to consider when you are adding switches into the mix and you have more switches, let's say for example this is happening. Say something like this happened. You would have to trust this port on the switch here, and you'd also want to trust these ports because they're in line. So it's based upon what port. So if you don't configure the upstream switches correctly, if you have other switches in the way between your DHCP server and the end devices, make sure you turn on trust on these ports correctly, or else it's not going to work right. So that's one thing to consider. So unfortunately I can't show you that, but that's okay. We'll move on to port security. So that's something we can look at. So another issue, remember I was talking about some of those Mac flooding issues where this PC over here could be malicious and he starts flooding out thousands of MAC addresses to try and overload our CAM table on these on this switch or any of the switches. We can mitigate that issue somewhat, and also not just for malicious intent, but just poor form by users. We can prevent them from causing problems for themselves. So let's say, for example, this is someone's office, and they decide to bring in their laptop, but you don't have wireless in this location. So they say, how do I fix this? I'm going to bring home that router that I have from home, which acts as a switch, and then I'm going to plug that into my wall. And that's going to get plugged into my wall jack. And then I'm going to hook that into, and then I'm going to hook that into my PC. And then I'll hook in the other connection into my laptop. And now I can use my home laptop at work. That's awesome, right? Problem is, a lot of times this can cause issues where the user will accidentally loop a cable back onto itself. They'll have an extra cable and they'll hook it into the wrong port or something like that, and they'll cause broadcast storms and looping issues on their side. So then you'll end up getting tickets and things to fix over here that were caused by someone bringing in a device that's not authorized. And it could cause other problems as well, but that's just a basic example. What we can do is turn on port security, and what port security will do in our switches, remember we have a CAM table that has all the MAC addresses that are learned, and actually you can see that partially here. What this will do is limit the number of MAC addresses per port. So we go into the port and we say, this is a MAC address that is allowed on it, or this is the maximum number of MAC addresses that are allowed. So, and this is actually something handy as well. A lot of situations occur in offices where you have this. There we go. Let me get rid of some of this stuff. There we go. So a lot of common locations that have voice over IP will look like this, where you'll have a switch, go to a wall, and then it'll go to an IP phone, and then from the IP phone that's going to go to the PC. And that's a very common way of setting things up. And Looks like I needed a crossover there. Whoops. That's because I don't have power over Ethernet. That's okay. We'll still talk about it though. It's not coming up because I don't have PoE, but that's fine. So let me just make this the correct cable at least, so I don't get yelled at. So this will be a common thing. So this switch over here is going to see one MAC address, 2 MAC address on this one port. So that's normal. So what often you'll see out there in the field is you'll have 2 MAC addresses being limited on a port, because if you get to 3, that means the user tried to slap a switch in here and are trying to connect things that they're not supposed to have, or they'll try and put one over here or something like that. They'll try and goof things up. So, or they're being malicious or something like that. So what we want to do is most of the time you're going to say limit the number of MAC addresses to 2. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go into the switch and we're going to say this port only is supposed to have 2 MACs on it. If it gets above that, we can do some things. Shut down the port. We can just ignore any other ones. There's some other violations we can do. So let's go into the config and we'll do that. This is port what? FA02. If you mouse over, it'll tell you. So we're going to go into fasteth02. And what we can do is either define specific MAC addresses that are valid on that port, or the number. So what you can do is switch port, port security, MAC address, and then you can either type in an actual MAC address. Well, remember this is Cisco, so you have to do it with the dotted decimal method. Something like that, you know. You can define specific MAC addresses, which is very time intensive and it causes a lot of overhead. Or you can do it based off of a sticky number. So what this will do is record the MAC addresses that it sees. The switch will not just put it into its CAM table, but it'll put it into its running config. So it'll kind of save those MAC addresses. So that's what we're going to do here. So we're going to say on this port, we're going to turn on sticky. So what sticky will do is do that that save to the running config. And then we're going to say a maximum of 2. So I only want to see 2 MAC addresses on this port at one time. We can also set the violation. So if you take a look there, we've already done 2 out of the 3 commands. You can also do what kind of violation do we want. So if it violates our 2 MAC policy, you know, will it shut it down? Will it restrict it? Will we protect? The default mode is shutdown. So if it gets to 3 MAC addresses, it'll just say no and just turn off the port. So that's actually a pretty nice way to know who's causing a problem. But if it's in a large environment, you might want to just say, you know, protect it, but you know, but don't shut it off. So protect, once the limit of addresses is reached, it will drop any unknown addresses until other MACs are removed or the limit's raised. So protect is basically up to 2, and then beyond that I'm just going to ignore you. Restrict is the same thing as protect, but it sends a notification saying that the violation has been hit. So you'll probably most often see protect or restrict in my opinion. So let's say we want to do protect. So now that port is configured to only allow 2 MAC addresses on it at any one time, and if it gets to 3, it'll just ignore that 3rd one. Now we can show that by doing, whoops, let's get out of here. We're going to do show port security. Which, interesting, is not showing me anything in here. Should show you some details on what's configured. Let's go check our show interfaces. let me go in here and just fix our connection. Could be because we don't have anything. And this is something that comes up a lot. If you type some sort of command that doesn't exist and you press enter, it will try to resolve that as a DNS resolution, and you'll have to wait a period of time for this to time out on its DNS resolution. Either you can go in there and tell it to not do DNS resolution for commands, which will prevent this timeout. So you saw I just typed Q by accident, so we have to wait a few seconds for this to go away. But once this comes back, I want to see if that'll show my port security correctly. If you do show interfaces like what I was looking for, this will show the error status in here as well. So in this information, it'll say whether or not a port is in error disable mode. And error disable mode is I've been shut down due to port security. So when port security is on the shutdown feature, it will it won't do a shutdown command. It will go into what's called, quote, error disable, and that's what will show up here. So it's not as easy to determine whether something's been shut off, or there's a connection issue, or it was error disabled. So you have to go in and check for that. So let's check our. Nah, it's still not showing me anything right now, so that's okay. There we go. We can also do this. If I do show port security and then the specific interface, it'll tell me what's going on. We can also clear our port security issues. So for example, it said there was in secure down and disabled. You can do that on a specific one, or you can just clear it for all. Okay, it's because I didn't have port security enabled. You can also do switch port. It would have to be non-dynamic port. That's okay. We'll leave it at that. So one other thing we'd want to do is enable port security globally, which is what it's complaining about right now. So the dynamic mode is a feature where it will automatically try to negotiate a trunk, which we haven't gotten to yet because we're about to get into VLANs, but a trunk allows multiple VLANs to communicate across it. An access port is only for one VLAN, so it's only for an end device, such as this guy. So if it's a dynamic port, we can't do switch port security correctly. So what we're going to do is go into that interface and set it correctly. So what we need to do is tell it is switch port mode access. That'll force it into access mode. And then what we can do is switch port security, which will then turn it on for that interface. So not only did we do the violation and the other settings for it, but we turned on port security as well. So now if we exit out of here, we go back to our main exec mode. If we show port security, it'll actually show up in here now in our list correctly. And then if we go and look at the actual interface, we'll do show port security interface, and then that interface, it'll then give us the information. So there's our port security is enabled, it's up, protect mode, all that's there. So that clear command though is very useful though. If this were in a shutdown violation mode, we could clear that violation, that port security violation, so that it would then come back up. So knowing that clear port security is actually very useful. So that's my fault, no problem though. At least you got to see some troubleshooting. So let's move on from here to NTP. So another protocol that's useful to security and keeping things running nicely is network time protocol. So if you're in a domain situation, some sort of LDAP domain or Active Directory, most likely your domain servers are going to be running as NTP servers, or some sort of router or server that's near to it, that's kind of close to the core, is going to be your main time server. And what that does is it allows all of the workstations, all the servers, everything communicates back to that one location to ensure that they're all up to date on the correct time. So that's very important, because if the times are off, the clocks are skewed incorrectly, you will have communications problems, you'll have log issues. It's not a good thing, especially with domains that are finicky like Active Directory. So you don't want objects appearing that are in the future or something like that. So what you use is network time protocol. So what we'll do is I'll show the website. The main site to do is ntp.org. So ntp.org provides the globally available time servers, and they check their time against the atomic clocks that are out there. There's a few out in the world that base their time off of the cesium atom and how that decays. It has a very accurate method of determining the time. So then you can poll these servers for the latest time using NTP. The preferred method is through their pool. They used to have a list of Stratum servers, and you'd have to choose specific servers to communicate to. It's much easier now. You can actually go to pool.ntp.org and you can poll that address. And it probably won't pull up a website, but that's what you would poll with the NTP protocol. You can also break it down based on your location. So you could do us.pool.ntp.org. So see here, it works, but you're not really supposed to go there with a web browser. Let's see if NTP pool wiki, I think it's a wiki that has it. There we go. It was www.pool. There we go. And then we have a whole bunch of servers throughout the world. So there's thousands and thousands of these servers that are part of this pool. So that's what makes the pool very nice, is it's a DNS method of you try to access the pool and it'll poll one of these servers. And then if you want to narrow it down based on a country or something like I like to do, you can choose a specific one like northamerica.pool.ntp or unitedstates.pool.ntp. You can narrow down your region, and you can see the number of servers is increasing continually. So that's very nice. Thank you to everyone out there who runs publicly available NTP servers. A lot of universities and such do that. So your main servers in your environment will probably communicate to one of those out there on the pool, and then all of your internal devices will communicate back to that central server in your environment. And that way you don't overload their servers, as well as you keep it securely communicating within your own network. You don't want every single device out there going out to the world to ask it for its time. So what we can do is also set up a Cisco device as our server. So one of our switches or routers could be the NTP server. So I'll show you how to do a client as well as server wise with that. So in order to become a NTP server, we would go into config mode and we can do NTP master. And on this one I can't do it, but you could do NTP master and it would provide that. I believe if I chose one of the routers it would do it. But NTP master will allow it to be queried for time data, so that makes it become an actual NTP server. We should be able to do NTP client. It's not on this one. Let me bring up a router just to see. This could be something to do with packet tracer too. We'll have to see. Yeah, alright, so the server had the option, the router has the option to become a server. Or actually, no, not this one. That would be NTP master. That's okay. So I'll show you on the router side for the client at least. So NTP master will make it become a server, but it depends on your version and what model you have and all that stuff. So obviously that switch didn't have the ability to do that. It's an older iOS and it's a lower end model, so probably didn't have that feature. And also when you're in Packet Tracer here, it doesn't have every single command that might be available for that, so that might be what I'm running into there. So, but what we can do is define a server. So when you do NTP server, that tells it I'm a client, I'm going to poll whatever server it is for my time. So you can see that they're configured NTP server. So if you do a question mark, it's going to say, well, who do I talk to? Unfortunately, in the iOS, we can't do a domain name. So, you know, we were over here looking at the pool. Well, that's a DNS name. So in this situation, you'd have to actually find an IP address of one that's out there that you can communicate to. But just for argument's sake, we could use some sort of internal system. And that will then make this router poll that server for its NTP time, for its time. We can also do some show commands based on NTP. So we can do show NTP, and then we have status. That'll show you basic clock information. So it'll tell you how off our clock is from the other clock that's out there, our server, and you know when the last time it was that it's been updated and all that information. Sometimes you also have the option of associations, which this one doesn't, but it'll display the peers that are connected. So if it's running as a server with that NTP master command, if you do NTP associations, it'll list off the peers that are connected to you. So that would be show NTP associations. So that's the basics of NTP. It's a very nice protocol, and all of your computers out there use it. You may not know it. If you go into Windows, for example, you go to Internet Time. Usually by default it'll say time.windows or something, or nist.gov. I changed mine, but most likely yours is out there talking to the Internet anyway. So it's a very commonly used protocol. So with that, we'll stop here, and then next video we'll start talking about VLANs.